be a good doctor, meaning a doctor that does their own investigation and shares with their patients what they're finding in their own research. Exactly what we expect from our doctors. Now they are being silenced and censored and coming under threat. Well, amongst those doctors that have appeared on the HighWire and expressed, their concerns with the vaccine, their discussions on COVID, the best and the brightest have been here, but among them, and perhaps the top of this sphere, is Dr. Peter McCullough, one of the most published doctors and scientists in the world. I am so honored to be joined by him right now, Dr. McCullough.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming here. This climate now, under the circumstances that are just being discussed by all of these great doctors here in America, where we have free speech. We may be on alternate media trying to say, hey, folks, we have a problem here. You're about to lose the doctor-patient relationship. You're about to lose any focus from your doctor discussing issues with you and their own personal take on things. Am I overstating it that this may be one of the most dangerous times to be a doctor?
I think we're at a dramatic inflection point in America. That montage was incredible.
Yeah.
From practicing doctors like Dr. Barkey, a family physician, to Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, professor of medicine at Stanford,
yeah.
All telling America that we've had a deep, pervasive change in the tenor of medical discourse, scientific discourse. America knows me. I testified in front of the Congressional Oversight Panel in 2007. I was on C-SPAN for hours. I've been a president of a major medical society, 650 peer-reviewed publications cited in the National Library of Medicine. I have 60 on COVID-19. And from the very beginning, before the vaccines, I felt a sense of strain. I felt a sense of discomfort. And then, frankly, it evolved into gag orders, threats, loss of employment, lawsuits. That's kind of before the vaccines. Now the vaccines come in. People want to know what in the world is going on. What's changed? And this is worldwide.
Yeah.
It's worldwide. What's changed in the world all at the same time, all working to suppress the free interchange of information around SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, and the vaccines.
What is so shocking about this moment is we are now, we are not blind any longer. The argument can't be with the CDC, the NIH, and Health and Human Services that we just didn't know better. And I saw a meme that says, boy, we went from trust the science to we didn't know what we were talking about really quickly. But in this moment right now, doctors are under threat. In California, law just passed. If you were a doctor that spoke out against COVID, your license is going to be under review. At the same moment, Tony Fauci is out saying, yeah, the science changed on us. The vaccine didn't end up stopping transmission the way we had hoped. Walensky saying the same thing. You got Deborah Birx admitting, I always knew that it wasn't going to stop transmission. Perhaps we overplayed our hand. We are getting these concessions from the CDC and Health and Human Services saying, yeah, we might have overstated it. And yet doctors like yourself that didn't overstate it actually, I think, were spot on. And every day, more and more of what you said is proven to be true. Yet they are not relaxing on this idea that CDC good, yes, any doctor challenging them wrong, even though we know they're the ones that are wrong.
It's so true. Now, California AB 2098 doesn't go into law until January 1st. Dr. Barkey and Dr. Mark McDonald have launched a lawsuit to stop that. You saw the vignette from Aaron Kheriaty, former professor of medicine and ethics psychiatry at UC Davis, saying, listen, patients go to doctors for a medical opinion. Sometimes they go to other doctors for second opinions, but they never go to doctors under gag orders to get a government narrative. The California Medical Board says that the statements need to be consensus-driven. Patients don't go to doctors for consensus-driven statements. And I can just tell you, in COVID-19, it's so complex. This illness, of which I've dedicated the last 3 years of my life to, I've essentially done a fellowship in COVID-19. It's so complex. The virus has mutated to such a great degree. We've had the introduction of all different types of biotechnologies, old medicines, new medicines, that for each patient, I completely agree with Dr. Kheriaty, each patient is unique based on their background conditions. Their diagnosis, their prognosis, and their management needs to be stylized, cannot be dictated in a government narrative.
And here's what's amazing about it. They speak about misinformation as though there's one piece of information that is totally made up and a figment of somebody's imagination, and then there's the science. When what you have brought to this conversation is that we have to at least admit that there are two arguing schools of science right now. There is not a religious belief in then science. There is the science coming from the CDC that is, apparently funded in many ways, and we're going to get into what's really going on with the pharmaceutical industry. But there are universities, there are science studies being done on myocarditis, heart issues, blood clotting, thrombocytopenia, cancer. I mean, the list is incredible and then we can go into masking and the lockdowns. I mean, study after study showing that there is real proof the masks don't do anything, lockdowns didn't do anything, the vaccines are dangerous in many different ways, definitely specific populations. We could argue how many people will be injured, but you cannot say that there's no science on the other side. And that would be the only way you could even maybe get away with saying you're going to censor this conversation because there's a bunch of crazy people that have no evidence, and then there's us. It's just not the case.
Well, let me tell you, I'm in my 4th decade of medical practice now. I'm the most published person in my field in the world in history prior to COVID, studying heart and kidney disease. The word misinformation has never appeared in any paper that I have written. It's never appeared in any textbook I have studied. It's never come up on a board question. And let me tell you what, I researched this. Misinformation appeared in the English literature around 1500. It was extensively used during Nazi Germany and other propaganda campaigns. And in 2018, Washington Post said misinformation was word of the year because it was used in partisan politics. Now enter COVID-19, and misinformation now is the tool that government authorities, medical boards, other entities that really have a stakeholder position in the vaccine agenda, they're using the word misinformation as a propaganda tool, meaning if they hold information, everybody else holds misinformation.
Right.
And you're right, in the world of science and medical care, clinical care, there are only scientific data and observations which change over time, and there's always 2 or more interpretive points of view.
Right.
Doctors spend endless hours and weekends going to meetings. Why? To discuss data. We review data together, and we always have an interpretive points of view, but it's exchanging those viewpoints that allows the science to progress. And what you saw in that vignette is very esteemed doctors saying, listen, we're afraid the field is actually not advancing because there is now a complete inhibition of scientific discourse.
Absolutely. Let's get into some of that discourse, and I want to really get into your area of expertise. We've talked a lot about this on the HighWire, and we keep seeing more and more studies, but no one has looked closer at the heart issues, the myocarditis. To me, in many ways, there are so many people, and we can get distracted by all the different things that people are writing about this vaccine. What's in it, and what's it being used for, but you don't have to go any further than heart issues to me. To me, if this causes myocarditis in children, and we have talked about the CDC studies going back out of Israel, incredible rises in myocarditis in small test groups that the CDC knew about, and so where's the science at now? You've been watching this. Is there anything you want to correct as we get more and more understanding of this? Because you've been really strong, you've been reading us everything. Where are we at?
I want to fill in on this because this is actually quite a story in medical history. If we go back to 1992,
okay.
Ralph Barrick at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and his team, arguably he's the most knowledgeable person in his team on coronaviruses, was studying beta coronaviruses in rabbits. And he could find certain strains of coronavirus in rabbits and later on in monkeys where the virus itself clearly could damage the heart.
Okay.
Now, I have to give the animals a lot of it. It's not the same as a human getting a coronavirus cold. But the point is, they were cardiotropic and cardiotoxic. 1992.
Okay.
Okay. Then COVID-19 hits, and there is a narrative that COVID respiratory illness could cause myocarditis. And it's interesting how this messaged out. It messaged out to such a degree that in the NCAA, the Big Ten League, that would be University of Michigan and others, I'm a Michigan graduate in graduate school, they hold a COVID-19 respiratory illness myocarditis screening program. So they have 9,600 athletes in that year, and they had 30% of them get COVID. They offered screening. 1,500 went forward for screening. They were able to find probably about half a dozen cases where there was an elevation in troponin, but it wasn't concordant with cardiac MRI findings. They found about 3 dozen cardiac MRI findings, none of which were clear-cut myocarditis. They ultimately settled on an idea that it's half a dozen to a dozen possible myocarditis or subclinical myocarditis, but no hospitalizations or deaths.
And out of how many again?
9,600 total in the league, 1,500 screened, and the paper appeared by Daniels and colleagues in JAMA. So because of that, the league says, well, listen, it's just not a big risk here. We did our due diligence. They dropped the program.
Okay, so they
dropped the program.
checking
troponin
levels
right.
and
Now, another paper appears by Joy and colleagues in Journal of American College of Cardiology, a very good journal, where they prospectively take community patients with COVID and they do every cardiac scan possible. They measure cardiac troponin. I should set this for the group. Cardiac troponin is a blood test.
Okay.
That the troponin is the most abundant protein in the heart. The troponin is the little ball that sits between actin and myosin, and it actually allows the ratchet function to come up and the machinery of the heart to contract and relax. That's troponin.
Okay.
So troponin is like a ball. During the setting of ischemia or injury, it flies off, it goes into the cytosol, and rapidly goes into the serum and blood, and it's actually measurable. We've relied on...
So it sort of gets cast off
right.
somehow
So, but
in
it
an
is
event in the heart.
It is the basis of the definition of myocardial infarction. We've relied on it now for 2 decades, and when there's a characteristic rise and fall in cardiac troponin, and another consistent feature like chest pain, EKG changes, or imaging changes, this is before COVID, we would diagnose a heart attack, a myocardial infarction. Now, myocarditis is not a traditional myocardial infarction because the blood vessels to the heart are open, but the heart's being directly damaged. So troponin has been used with supportive information like EKG or imaging to diagnose myocarditis. Yeah. And so Barrick knew this back with coronaviruses in 1992
this is the big
going
baddie,
forward.
And what's interesting too, because we bring up these names, Ralph Barrick. This is the gain of function researcher, or at least that we think is in the middle of this, being funded by NIH. But part of it, he's got a thing for coronaviruses. It's his specialty. He's the one saying, you know, this could be a bioweapon somewhere in the future. But in this investigation of his, he's saying some of these coronaviruses have heart issues in the animals I'm studying.
And he proved it.
And he proved it.
So he proved it. So, but there was enough of a hint that there could be a cardiac problem with COVID that in fact, that
on the Big Ten.
Yeah, the athletes are doing it, and they weren't the only ones. There were other U.S. military had a screening program. So many, because of COVID, it could cause myocarditis. They don't see much there. Military drops their program. The Big Ten drops their program. And this paper by Joy and colleagues, prospective, they measure troponin at baseline. They measure it afterwards. They do every test at all. And community COVID, not military, not athletes, people like you and me, they don't find any.
Okay.
They don't find any.
So then we can sort of get from that this form of coronavirus and the amount we are inhaling in an infection does not seem to be causing the heart issue that Barrick saw in his animal.
Right. And one more piece of data, Valley and colleagues from Israel studies hundreds of thousands of Israelis before the vaccines with COVID-19 and has a survival curve where they follow people over time. The rate of myocarditis in those getting COVID is no different than the background rate of people who didn't get COVID, because you can get it from a parvovirus, an adenovirus, it can be idiopathic. So the point is, conclusion, before the vaccines, COVID-19 respiratory illness for humans is a negligible risk for myocarditis. So we're there. Now the vaccines start. So the vaccines are administered, and our inference is that the human body gets a far deeper and more systemic exposure to the spike protein. These are the spines on the ball of the virus. They cause myocarditis. There was a paper by Volio and colleagues from Italy showing for sure the spike protein damages the heart. Then it advanced. Bowmeyer and colleagues did biopsies of young people presenting myocarditis, finds the spike protein in the heart muscle. So, I mean, it's there. Right there. The conclusion. And
we have the delivery mechanism. If we're seeing an issue, we can see how it would be delivered.
It's right there. It's right there in the heart, causing damage. The FDA weighs in June of 2021 and says, yeah, it looks like the vaccines cause myocarditis. They reviewed what they had and the CDC had and said, okay, yeah, it causes myocarditis. Then the whole thing starts to explode. So what we see over the next year is Choi, I believe, Verma was the first. Washington University in St. Louis, they report a fatal case. Someone gets myocarditis and they die. Then Choi in Korea, young man, fatal case. Gill, this was the most dramatic.
And these were all after vaccination?
These are after vaccination.
Okay.
COVID not implicated in these.
Okay.
Then Gill reports, this is the tragic, 16 and 17-year-old boys found dead at home by their parents on days 3 and 4 after the second shot of Pfizer. And the parents, do the right thing. They get an autopsy. The coroner looks at this. He calls in pathologists from Michigan and from University of Minnesota. They look at all the data. They agree the Pfizer vaccine is the proximate cause of death in these boys. But important because there was no premonitory symptoms, no chance for CPR. The boys didn't alert their parents that anything was wrong. So the Gill paper is important. Then we have a paper that comes in from Patone and colleagues, UK, where now they have 100 fatal cases, 100.
Wow.
Not autopsy proven, but the number one thing they put on the death certificate there was vaccine-induced myocarditis. 100 cases in circulation. Our best cardiology journal. Our best.
Wow.
Half of the cases are with Pfizer and Moderna, but half are with AstraZeneca, which they use. So it can happen with adenoviral. The spike protein mechanism.
So for people that may be watching for the first time, mRNA technology in the Pfizer and Moderna, adenoviral vaccine vector in AstraZeneca, meaning they're using a monkey virus that's not supposed to affect human beings, sort of as a delivery system or a DNA code that goes to the cell.
Right, and then finally, this just popped. Kim and colleagues from Korea. Koreans are doing a great job, by the way, on this topic. The first Novavax-induced myocarditis. Novavax, recall, is no genetics here. That's just 5 micrograms of the purified Wuhan wild-type spike protein. And in fact, a young person gets myocarditis. Another teaching point in these cases for the doctors and nurses listening, the treatment here is corticosteroids, actually giving steroids, giving colchicine. The myocarditis is almost always the outer part of the heart muscle and involving the lining around the heart, the pericardium. So the term myopericarditis is probably a better term to use.
Seen that term?
A better term to use. And so it resolves, in that case, with corticosteroids and the use of colchicine anti-inflammatory, which is our standard for pericarditis, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like naproxen or ibuprofen for pain control. If they develop signs and symptoms of heart failure, which some do, we actually have to use drugs called renin-angiotensin system inhibitors and beta blockers. There was a vignette that Joe Rogan reviewed with me when I went on his show of a young college student at Northwestern University. Her first name was Simone, where she gets Moderna. A few months later, myocarditis, and she goes all the way to heart transplant at Northwestern. She dies afterwards of a complication. That was a clear-cut case. And all that is in the backdrop. And so when the Pfizer and Moderna go for full FDA approval, they get from the FDA a biological licensing agreement letter, a BLA letter, which is not a full approval. It says you could be approved if you commit to doing these things. And in both letters it says you must study myocarditis with your vaccines, and you must do what's called prospective cohort studies, which is measure everything at baseline, then give the vaccine, and then measure everything afterwards. Don't wait for it to develop and then try to figure it out later on. Do it, prospective cohort study, and nothing happens. So the companies don't do anything.
Meaning they didn't do the study?
They didn't do the study.
Nothing happened.
Well, they didn't do the studies.
They didn't do the studies.
There was no announcement that they were commissioning. Typically, this would go to Duke or the Brigham or Mayo Clinic, and they would just do a really high-quality prospective cohort study, right? Because everyone's taking the vaccines. All the young people are encouraged to take the vaccines. So what happens? So Mansukian and colleagues from Thailand do the first prospective cohort study, and Mansukian has a total of 301 children aged 13 to 18, and they get all the baseline troponin, EKG, and echo at baseline. This is an ultrasound of the heart. Then they get the second dose of Pfizer. Then they get everything repeated. And here's the bombshell.
Do all those, they look at them
Do it all again. They come up with a rate of myocarditis of 2.3%. Previous, the FDA had estimated 62 cases per million. There were data from Tracy Hogue, UC Davis said 250 per million. And then Kaiser Permanente had a estimate of 537 per million. This blows that out of the water. This is 23,500 cases per million, according to Mansukian. And of those, 7 kids had myocarditis that was serious, 2 kids hospitalized. They confirmed it by MRI. They used the latest troponin assay, highest quality EKG and MRI tech. That was a wonderful paper, and that's followed on the last few weeks by a study done from a very renowned cardiologist, Christian Mueller, in Basel, Switzerland. I personally know him. He's a friend of mine. He studies 777 healthcare workers, gets troponin before and after the third shot. And now it doesn't get EKGs and echoes and all the MRI, but what does he find? He finds the rate of a characteristic rise of troponin, which is a rise and then a fall over 4 days. That's characteristic for cardiac injury in 2.8% of individuals, 2.8. Wow. So Mansugian, 2.3, Mueller, 2.8, is presented at the European Society of Cardiology, which is the biggest cardiology meeting in the world. And now, days later, Pfizer and Moderna announced they're going to start their cardiac studies for myocarditis.
Unbelievable. And that is so egregious when you're now telling me they were told they were supposed to be doing that very early on, that they wouldn't get approval if they didn't do it. They didn't do it. And I fault the FDA before I even fault Moderna or Pfizer. That was the regulatory agency. This is your job. Your job is to enforce and make sure the proper studies are being done. And I always wonder as I sit here, Peter, whether 2.3% sounds like enough to people. So here's what I would say to somebody. Here's it is. You're at a school function for your child. There's 100 kids in the class, and they have 100 cupcakes out. 2.5 of these are going to lead to a heart condition. You know, do you just say, hey, go ahead, we'll take that risk with our kid, eat any cupcake you want? Because that's what we're talking about. We're not talking a risk out of 1 million anymore or 100,000, which is what we're told. What I find fascinating, and we've covered a little bit of this trial, is it's only 301 kids. If injury, we are always told vaccine injury, we've been told this for a century now, but certainly decades, it's a 1 in a million. It's a 1 in a million. If it's 1 in a million, 300 should not be enough to even see your problem. I mean, that study, you would get lucky if you saw one case, and instead you're saying they have 7 cases out of 300. That is so horrifying. In the face of what we've been told about the safety record of vaccines, you would think this program would be stopped in its tracks.
Well, it should have been stopped. I've testified in the U.S. Senate twice now, multiple state Senate. I said a single case of fatal vaccine-induced myocarditis should have shut the program down. For sure should have changed the consent form. I've recently checked the consent form, which nowadays the consent just refers people to an FAQ. I read the FAQ. Nowhere on it does it say fatal vaccine-induced myocarditis.
Right.
It's complete.
Is it now a known?
It's an absolutely known and recognized. Now think about this. Coronaviruses since the 1990s themselves, it was known they could cause cardiac injury. It was enough to stimulate the military and college football to screen for COVID. Then the vaccines come, and the vaccine manufacturers do not measure troponin during the registrational trials when they knew this rich history that this was going to cause heart damage. In fact, they knew it so much that COVID-19 could cause heart damage. Why wouldn't the vaccines with the spike protein cause heart damage? And they are willfully blind to any cardiac toxicity of the vaccines, and we are deep in trouble now because there is a clear recognition that this myocarditis in some people can lead to a scar. The scar is a small area of like a scar you see on your skin, but the electricity goes down, and when it goes through the scar, it depolarizes slowly, then it loops up, and it forms reentry. And when reentry occurs during a normal cardiac depolarization, that's the nidus for ventricular tachycardia, or VT, and that isn't a heart rhythm in me or you that can be well over 200 beats a minute. It starts to make us dizzy, and if we don't do something, it degenerates to ventricular fibrillation, and then we're gone. We're on the floor, and CPR is started. And if you've seen any of these montages of these athletes, when this happens, they go down like a rock. They can't even hold out their hands to protect themselves. We're just absolutely slamming to the floor. We have seen montage after montage of people having sudden cardiac death. It's called sudden adult death syndrome.
Yeah, crazy.
And myself and Asim Malhotra, a prominent cardiologist in the UK, have come up with the same conclusion, that when we see a young person now who's previously healthy, no antecedent illness, and they suddenly die, and the two patterns are dying in sleep, typically from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m., or dying during sports. By the way, both of those time periods, there's a rise in norepinephrine, epinephrine, which is probably an internal trigger for this. And there's no suicide, there's no drug overdose, there's no motor vehicle accident. It is the COVID-19 vaccine and subclinical myocarditis, like in the Gill paper, until the parents come out or the family comes out and they tell us otherwise. And the family can clear this up, Del. If they come out and say, listen, they didn't take the vaccine, okay, we'll lay down our concern. But let's be conservative and assume right now that these are fatal vaccine-induced myocarditis cases.
Here's what I've spoken about for years, all through COVID we discussed, but you know how you just keep saying things enough times, but something occurs to you that's so simple and so horrifying, and this is it when I look at these trials. You have designed trials. You have tested products. You know what this is all about. I feel like every time we're seeing something now in population, a population issue pops up, a myocarditis, we go back, well, what did they see in the trials? And you find out that they literally built a wall to make sure that they didn't allow anyone to investigate that particular issue. Almost like they expected they would have that issue if they looked for it and didn't want to reveal it. And I want to say this, I want to really put this through to people because it's sinister. I'm not going to go as far as why they're doing it, but what has happened here, we have President Biden telling, well, first Donald Trump saying, I'm going to sink more money into the warp speed of this vaccine than any vaccine or technology in the history of medicine. More money. We are opening the floodgates to Moderna and Pfizer and anyone that wants to be a part of this competition. You now have money coming out every, doorway and entryway there is. We are being told we will spend, and that's just America. There's France and Germany, and everyone's pouring money into these few companies. They do trials of tens of thousands of people. And one of the issues we know from the beginning, from animal trials with Barrick, even into the very first, approaches of this vaccine, myocarditis is popping up. We see it with AstraZeneca. We got some sort of blood clotting issue. All of this is known, as you're saying. And here's what's so shocking to me, and I said this on the show, it hit me the other day. We are living in a country throughout this locking us down, destroying our jobs. My friends, I come from Hollywood, they can't get onto a film set without being PCR tested every single day. Every single day, they have to take a test. There are elementary schools in this country that were testing some of them every day, but at least once a week on Monday, you're getting the swab rammed up your nose. You can't get into your preschool without getting tested. Then we go and look at these trials where we are testing a brand new mRNA technology, never been injected into a human being before, could alter DNA, RNA. We don't know. We don't know how this is going to work. And the one thing a vaccine is supposed to do is get us out of this pandemic, which means it's going to stop transmission. The only way to figure out if it stops transmission, we're being told the biggest carrier, the biggest issue is an asymptomatic carrier, meaning someone that has it but doesn't know they have it, and they're spreading it. That's why we're all locked down and masked up, and then why we're PCR testing every day. And it occurs to me, the only place in this country where you were safe from daily or weekly PCR testing, everyone in a job, in a school, they're being subjected to it. But the only place you can be sure you don't have to worry about a PCR test is in the freaking trials of the vaccine itself. The one place we need to know, can it stop transmission, is the only place they're walking in and out. They're doing whatever they want. They're hugging each other. We don't care. We're not testing you. And we're not testing for myocarditis. We're not testing troponin levels. We know we have potential heart issues. Why are we sticking these people in a room? Why are they in the clinical trial? 45,000 of them for the one and 30,000 the other. The billions of dollars, isn't that what a trial's supposed to be doing? I mean, it just defies reason to the point of it being purposefully criminal.
Well, it's an interesting observation. I've never heard someone put it together that way, but you make perfect sense that the clinical trial is not only for efficacy, but it's for safety and, very importantly, risk mitigation. No new product is ever going to be free of problems, and it's never going to be applied to everybody. So we always have to figure out who is it going to cause problems for. Yeah. What I'm making a case for, there was 20 years of data about coronaviruses, spike protein, myocarditis. There was enough to have everybody get worried with COVID. For sure, they should have measured troponin with the before and after each injection. Should have been cardiac safety built in. For sure, we should have done things. Transmission actually would have been tested with what's called challenge studies. And there was a discussion, Oxford discussed this originally. That is, taking somebody who's vaccinated and just put them face to face with someone with COVID. Now, that would have been a challenge study. No one had the guts to do this. But everything we've learned about the vaccine, but listen.
At least PCR test once a week.
Right. Well, listen to this. We should have known what we call pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. So we learn this after the vaccines are released, and everything we've learned gives everybody a sense of nausea. And let me fill you in with some of these citations. Fertig and colleagues figures out how to measure the messenger RNA. It goes up in the bloodstream and stays up for 2 weeks. That's when they stopped. We don't know when it goes down, but it's circulatory for 2 weeks. Foreign messenger RNA in the body, presumably on lipid nanoparticles or now in exosomes. Another piece of information.
That's problematic because we're told it's just located in the arm, it's short-lived, and it disappears, dissipates.
Right.
Antibodies kick in, this is over.
Right.
It's running all through your body.
It's running through your body at least 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Röntgen, Stanford, they're getting lymph node biopsies for other reasons, but they learn how to stain for the messenger RNA. It's in lymph nodes for 2 months. For 2 months. Now JAMA, Hannah and colleagues, breast milk. It's found messenger RNA in breast milk, and that broke, and someone pulled a Reuters press release a year earlier, says, oh, don't worry, it doesn't come out in breast milk, and there it is. Wow. In breast milk. So if it's circulatory in blood and it's in breast milk, and even in the Hannah paper, they simply say, listen, it's everywhere. It's in oral secretions, it's in urogenital secretions, it's in sweat, it's in breast milk. We don't know when this clears out of the body. Remember, the genetics are the code to produce the spike protein. The person who knows the most about the spike protein and where it is in the body and how long it lasts is Bruce Patterson at IncellDX, former pathologist at Northwestern and Stanford. Bruce has reviewed the data, published the best he can. As far as he can tell, it doesn't get out of the body. The spike protein doesn't. We're still waiting for someone to take a vaccine and be shown to be clear of messenger RNA and clear of spike protein. So far, that has not been demonstrated in the scientific literature.
I think about, I've had several interviews with Dr. Robert Malone, who's involved in inventing this technology for vaccines. One of the things, and it speaks to your point, one of the things he said to me is that when he first said, look, this is work, his work starts as trying to use mRNA technology to do a gene insertion, to fix issues like cancer in the future by sending an mRNA in that can insert itself and somehow like get in there and fix a DNA issue. He realizes through years of this that it's going nowhere because the immune system's attacking that mRNA before it can really find purchase. The seed finds purchase where it wants to, but he says, this is what he said to me, then it hit me, it's not going to work for gene therapy, but it'd be great as a vaccine. The reason being that it will, it'll get in there, it'll be there just long enough to stimulate the immune system to start making antibodies, but it won't stay in circulation, which could lead to autoimmune disease and all sorts of other issues, which is always the big concern with vaccines. He's like, this would be a perfect vaccine because it'll be there, very short-lived, the immune system is really good at killing it, we know it is, and then boom, you've got your antibodies, you're moving on. What he said to me was so shocking is that they took away the whole reason he thought it was a good idea, which was they inserted this uridine. They basically shifted the structure of the DNA of this spike protein, which is the bioweapon of the virus we're talking about. They make it so that it can persist. So instead of being able to be killed by the immune system, it's putting the immune system asleep. It's able to hang out. And as you're saying now, this thing, we don't know if it ever dies. It's going all over the place. It's not going away.
Right. So messenger RNA has ribonucleic acids, and it has a 3' and 5' cap. The innovation was to develop these nucleoside analog caps, which are undigestible. Now, normally your body is making messenger RNA all the time. You have RNases that quickly break them down. There is a product, by the way, that I can use in cardiology. It's called inclisiran. Inclisiran is a small interfering RNA that interferes for the production of PCSK9, an important regulatory protein that we deal in lipid metabolism. Now, the pharmacokinetics of that has been studied by the company, which took years to develop it, and that rises in the bloodstream and it goes down in a day because it doesn't have those synthetic analog caps, and the body clears it. With the vaccines, they have these synthetic analog caps, and this deep history of messenger RNA really goes back to the military. Our DARPA, which is the Military Research Division, has had a program. It's called the Protect Adapt P3 program, the Pandemic Planning Prevention Program, since 2012. And they have said on their website that they plan to basically handle pandemics in 60 days using messenger RNA technology. That's the U.S. military in 2012 working with vaccine consultants and others. So this
Well,
wasn't Operation Warp Speed. This wasn't Pfizer, Moderna, J&J. They're kind of...
This is the end game for a military operation that's been going on since 2012?
It's military conceived.
Okay.
Now, others are involved for sure. Now, we know Moderna wrote the patent with the National Institutes of Health, and Stéphane Bancel, who was the CEO of Bio-Pharmaceutical, the French company, they built the biosecurity annex level 4 security in Wuhan. Now, Bancel does this in 2011. Then he changes companies and he joins Moderna. So a CEO of a huge company joins a very small company in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's in our book, Courage to Face COVID-19. We capture all this history.
By the way, here we go. Just
Yeah.
everyone, if you haven't read this book, you better, go out. Copies running off the shelves everywhere. It really is. What I love about this is you've got John Leake as your partner on this. We had both of you on to discuss this book. Crime writer, he really deals with this as though you're reading a crime novel, which is exactly what this is.
It's a page turner, but the head scratcher is, why would now billionaire Stéphane Bancel leave this wonderful French company where he's doing all this great stuff, and he joins a tiny company, Moderna, and they start working on the patent with the NIH for the Moderna patent. Note that Moderna is now suing Pfizer, and you're right, something is very unique about this messenger RNA. When you think about it, segments of it probably had to be humanized so the body would read it and wouldn't reject it. This is very important. Mm-hmm. And then a paper just came out from Nunes Castilla, very interesting paper, studying the spike protein, the product of the genetics. And what they showed is probably 36 areas of humanization, meaning the spike protein has homology to human proteins itself. And what Nunes Castillas is saying is that, listen, this is the setup for autoimmunity. Right. It was used to make the body accept it probably and read it and make the spike protein, the genetics at least manageable. But now this chronic exposure, the fact that human bodies are being exposed day by day to a foreign protein that looks like it doesn't even...
That maybe, let me try and simplify it and see if I got this close, which is what you're saying is there are elements of this now that genetically will look like your own body, could look like, the myelin sheath, for instance. And so if that's the case, if it ends up looking like a protein in the body or something in the body, then your immune system, in creating the ability to fight this spike protein, will say, oh, there's spike protein there. No, that's my body. That's not the spike protein. That's the thing that looks like the spike protein, but it's actually part of my body. It starts attacking, and now that immune system attack upon your own body is the definition of autoimmune.
Yeah, I think you have it, and I think specifically since the genetics install in somatic cells, meaning they're not just in immune cells, but they're in heart muscle cells, they're in the support cells in the brain. The cells themselves express spike protein on the surface, and then the body says, wait a minute, that's not supposed to be there. I'm going to attack you. So I've interviewed Dr. Polycretis from Italy, who has the belief that every cell that expresses spike protein is under attack from another cell. It's a cellular war going on, introduced by these vaccines.
This has always been to me, and I've described, I'm a layperson, no medical background whatsoever. Let's be reasonable here. What this vaccine does is it basically, I say, is like a recipe or a code that is sent inside my own cells, and then it teaches my cell how to make the spike protein, the most dangerous part of the virus. And then it starts making the spike protein, putting it on the outside of the cell, and then all of a sudden my immune system is going, oh my God, I'm under attack. Not by something that I just breathed through my nose, not by something I just got in my lungs and, is where I have an alarm system for this. Suddenly it's appearing and it's being created by my own cells. My own cells are now the enemy that my immune system is saying, oh my God, these cells are producing a viral, bioweapon that could kill me. And so it literally sees your own cells producing it as the enemy. How does that not lead to autoimmune disease? I mean, to me, I'm glad there's scientists backing up, but as a layperson, it seemed like that would be the only route. I mean, it's just crazy.
There are still announcements that we hear from biotech companies and the manufacturers that we know saying that this is just the beginning. There's going to be messenger RNA for influenza, for respiratory syncytial virus, that we're going to install the genetic code for many pathogens, that we're going to express many pathogens, and this is going to be the basis of our new immune program.
It's horrifying. Based on the great science that we already did that showed how safe this is. I mean, we jumped out of the science, got an EUA. We erased the placebo group as soon as we had an EUA because, God forbid, we have a placebo group that continues on, and those that are being injured are not getting the time of day from Moderna or Pfizer. They're being ignored and lied about to the FDA. So all of it's a giant cover-up. And now, based on this terrible science that is not being done, not testing troponin, not even doing a PCR test while you're in the trials, while the rest of the world's having a PCR test to walk in a door, and then you come out of it saying, oh no, it was a success. We're going to bring flu shots and chickenpox shots and all sorts of small and large issues using mRNA technology. We could go on and on about all that you've worked on the issues of the vaccine. I want to ask you this, because as a doctor and a scientist and someone who I'm sure spent most of your career looking up to those at the CDC and the FDA that have, provided all the science and evidence that back up all the great work you have done. When you looked at this, and while you made this book, this is probably better to even say the courage to face COVID-19. You're looking at sort of this almost criminal enterprise that's taking place. How would you describe the regulatory agencies now? Are they protecting us? Are they infiltrated? Where are the red flags? Because I feel like this is our biggest issue. I never believed that industries are looking out for my best good. They're trying to make a dollar. I don't care. BP spills oil in the ocean. It's not lost on me. The first thing they're going to do is try and hide it. It wasn't me. I didn't take the cookie out of the cookie jar. Companies lie. Industries that make billions of dollars, I think they're liars. They tend to lie to cover their own butts. That's not who I have an issue with. They're acting normally. FDA, CDC, NIH, Health and Human Services, these agencies are there knowing this is a pack of liars that have lost billions and billions of dollars for death and injury from products they've made before. They're supposed to be protecting us. Robert Kennedy Jr. often saying they've been subsumed, they're infiltrated. What is your take?
Well, the people are calling this now the alphabet agencies, right? All these three-letter agencies, and they exist all over the world. We could extend it to the MHRA in England, the TGA in Australia, EMA in Europe. One of the first concerns, that I've already mentioned it, is the NIH can co-write patents with companies. The National Institutes of Health should never be able to co-write a patent with Moderna on a vaccine and then turn around and have an NIH division director promote vaccines. Right then and there. That should.
Tony Fauci. Tony Fauci is promoting a product, saying it's safe, when people inside that regulatory agency are going to make money from the product.
Right. So whether it's him or the agency, it's a gross conflict of interest.
Yes.
Let's take the FDA. Remember, before COVID, emergency use authorization had been used for anthrax and a few other products. It's always military.
Okay.
It is a military-oriented regulation, so the military can move quickly to protect our soldiers. Under emergency use authorization, it's not entirely clear if the FDA really has a regulatory role. Does the FDA really need to opine on something, or do they not? It's unclear. The FDA is showing no interest in even evaluating safety data on the EUA products to shut them down. When they were offered by HHS, Alex Azar, so the HHS has to sign off on something that there is an emergency, and they're offered by the Department of Defense. The FDA's behavior almost seems like choreography to me, as opposed to tough regulatory behavior. And to make matters worse, Del, the named sponsors of the U.S. vaccine program that are administering the program to America are the CDC and the FDA. The FDA should not be a named sponsor of the program. The FDA ought to be a separate watchdog advised by independent doctors. The FDA ought to be the first one to say there's a safety problem, we're going to shut it down. I think there's an entanglement there where no one at the FDA either wants to shut this down or even wants to look at safety, or they feel as if they're part of the spirit of the program to get a needle in every arm.
You just presented a thought to me that I'm now putting it together. Let me pose a hypothesis that puts two thoughts together that you've just said. You just told me that the military, was the one talking about mRNA technology as a pandemic response back in 2012. 2012, they're already looking at technology. I don't know. Obviously, they've done human trials we haven't heard about, I would guess, because I had thought, so far what we can see in our investigations is this technology really hasn't, as a vaccine, been tested in human beings. That was what Warp Speed was all about. But if this was an approach by our military, in a future pandemic. Now, put aside whether or not COVID was a test run or a real run, or they really thought it was a virus. That doesn't matter. The point being that up until now, you're saying EUAs have really only been used for the military.
Right.
That it isn't an FDA function necessarily. It's just the military. We are rushing our guys into battle. Anthrax is a problem. We don't have time to see if this vaccine is safe or not. We're going to go ahead and take the risk. We're going to move with it. And so now COVID vaccine needs to be used in a pandemic model, exactly as described back in 2012. And the FDA, and this would, in this hypothesis, it would answer something that's never made any sense, seems to just be like, it's like somebody like, just tell me what boxes to check. I'm not reading it, and handing it over.
Right. And public statements really matter. Dr. Rubin, the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, said at the pediatric meetings in the fall of 2021, we will never know if this is safe in children unless we just go and do it. So the behavior was not the FDA worried about safety. The FDA is actually just waving this on. It appears to be choreography. The current...
But I've been looking at the FDA as the head top of this thing, and you're saying no, military and government's the head of this. There's a chance all they are is just signing off on a dictate coming from above.
Right, HHS and the military, that's really the organizational setup, Health and Human Services and the military. So the FDA is, in a sense, in a choreographic position to kind of approve or do something. The current head of the FDA, someone who I know, Robert Califf from Duke, he is a hardcore clinical trialist, a drug safety hawk. He's made his living looking at safety of cardiovascular drugs. He's the most silent person in America right now. You don't hear from him. The other observation is the CDC. The CDC really doesn't have any role in administering a vaccine program. Remember, it's the CDC, and many of my fellow residents, I trained at University of Washington, they were CDC officers. The CDC, for instance, came in Dallas in the Ebola outbreak, did a great job. Hantavirus did a great job. What do they do? What does the CDC do? They do outbreak investigation. Oh. They do in vitro diagnostics. They actually help get a head start on assays and data analytics. But the CDC has never come out and run a public program. And here we have the FDA and CDC never having done that. If we ever were going to have a mass vaccination program that's so important to America, we should have had a vaccine administration set up. And we should have had independent oversight, data safety monitoring board, monthly safety reviews, human ethics committees. We should have had the Cadillac program, because there could have been risk mitigation. There could have been an opportunity to figure out who is getting myocarditis, who is dying with the vaccines. How can we change it? Maybe the doses are too strong. Maybe there's certain risk groups. There's a late-breaking paper by Idawit and colleagues from Thailand showing that a certain mutation called the SCN5A mutation in the heart, a sodium channel, that's the risk predictor for the sudden death in a small study, the vaccine-induced myocarditis. So there's the innovation, right? So the idea is we could have actually managed this, but instead to put the CDC and FDA as the sponsors of the program, the FDA kind of hand-waving this along, having the roots of messenger RNA be DARPA. This is all starting to come out now.
Right. So DARPA, here we are then back to military and government, is all entangled in this, which would explain why none of this is sort of making sense from a lay perspective. I'm not seeing the puzzle pieces coming together the way I've ever seen them before. There are other interests involved here. And then there's what I would say, not only are these regulatory agencies invested in these products, which is really scary. By the way, we just sent Peter Marks basically saying you need to take down your promotional videos of the COVID vaccine because your own EUA says you're not allowed to make these statements without saying this product hasn't been properly safety tested. It's under, so they're breaking their own rules and they're becoming propaganda machines.
But you could break your own rules if it's a military operation. Interesting. The state of Kansas just prohibited all COVID-19 vaccine commercials, because they're not safe and effective.
Right.
It violates the Truth in Advertising Act, the Landman Act, the U.S. Drug and Cosmetic Act. Pharmaceutical companies can't go on TV and just say, our product is safe and effective, use it. They have to give disclosures about what could happen.
Right.
So you see things off the rails. I mentioned the consent form not being updated. What consent form would not be updated with a new medical problem? The package inserts are always updated.
Yeah.
So this has all the look and feel of a military operation where they say, listen, we don't have to follow these rules. The military doesn't follow typical rules because it's an emergency. Now, in the last few days, the first thing the Republicans do is they put forward a bill to end the COVID-19 emergency. And what's President Biden's response? Veto. Want the emergency to go.
Yeah.
This is a red flag. When our leaders push to extend emergencies that don't exist, and I tell you, doctors are the ones who will make the call on whether or not there's a COVID emergency. When they do that, that's telling you they're drunk on power.
Yes.
They're drunk on power.
Yes.
We're under a national COVID emergency that's been extended, and we're under a national monkeypox emergency. I don't see anybody worried about monkeypox, let alone perceive an emergency.
It's really incredible. I mean, there's so many things we could get into, but let's get into the personal effect this has had on you now, because you, as you are right here, and you've said before, I make sure I list every author that's put out the studies. You are, I don't know how you're able to hold all this information in your brain. There's a reason why you've been more published than any heart doctor in the world. There's a reason, why you've risen to the fame. You've made every hospital you've been at prior to COVID. You're the star of that establishment. And yet you, of all people, speaking the truth, not from the top of your head or making things up, citing the science as a heart specialist, pointing out the myocarditis, pointing out the troponin issues, how you should be testing for it. You are now, I would say, of everybody, you're in real jeopardy of having your certifications removed. In fact, let me just go ahead and read the letter that you received just recently. This is sent to Dr. Peter McCullough. Dear Dr. McCullough, the American Board of Internal Medicine, ABIM, provided you notice by letter dated May 26, 2022, the notice that ABIM's Credentials and Certification Committee, CCC, would consider whether to recommend a disciplinary sanction against you in light of public statements you made about the purported dangers of or lack of justification for COVID-19 vaccines. In light of all the evidence and circumstances, the CCC determined to recommend that your board certifications be revoked. And then I think it lists a whole bunch of specific statements and things that you have made throughout COVID, and you're having to address those specific statements. This is serious, and it's troubling that, as we've said opening this up, it's not like there's one group that has the science and then someone's just making something up. There is, at the very least, conflicting science. I would say the body of science is defending your perspective. I think what they're calling science is wishful thinking. It's a lot of red stamping, or just pushing things through. We can't quite figure out, maybe it's military. But the science being done by worldwide, universities, nations, is all really showing what you've been saying, yet you're at risk of not being a heart doctor in the future.
This is deeply troubling. I think anybody looking at this should view me as an example for them. We have 1 million doctors in the United States, 500,000 nurse practitioners and physician assistants. I have consistently been, as you know, I've testified twice in the U.S. Senate, multiple state senates. I am asked by request to answer questions under oath, to do the best I can as a citizen. I've shown up and I've done my job. Interesting talking point, Steve Bannon, former White House advisor, he's close to going to prison because he didn't show up in Congress and testify. I've showed up upon request and testified. I've done my job as a citizen. I've provided commentary on major news stations, ABC, Fox, Real America, you name it. And I have 60 peer-reviewed publications on the topic. When Peter Navarro reached out to me from the White House and needed help, I answered the call. When Senator Johnson called me, I answered the call. It's all in the book, Courage to Face COVID-19. And now the American board, which is only concerned with, did I complete my residency and did I pass my board exams and do I have clinical competence? What's called medical.
That's what they usually focus on.
That's what they don't focus. They don't go out and police what doctors say about heart disease, diabetes, or kidney disease. In fact, the Supreme Court says, as a doctor, I have free speech. It's been asserted that a doctor, in his or her public statements and talking with patients, has free speech. What the ABIM does is, in September of 2021, they announced that they're going to have a COVID misinformation campaign. And they put that out there. And what they did in my case is they went back in time to March of 2021, and they said, aha, you made statements when you answered questions in the Texas Senate that we disagree with. And you are now hereby accused of misinformation. And they pulled in other statements. And then they said, well, we're going to have a committee meeting on you. So I said, can I attend the meeting? No, you can't. Well, I submitted a response document supporting everything I said, more citations, about 20 pages. They have a meeting. We don't know what the methods of the meeting were, what types of criteria did they use. I did analyze who attended that meeting. Nobody at that meeting has any research competency in COVID. None of them have any original publications on COVID. None of them have given any testimony or public statements on COVID. The American Board of Internal Medicine hasn't issued any learning modules. They haven't issued any media guidance for doctors, nothing. And they come to this conclusion, and when they come to the conclusion, then they say, and we've come to this conclusion, and here's our evidence of what we think the science is. So then they present their evidence after the conviction has already happened. This violates every aspect of due process. There was no equal protection. How did they review all the doctors? They didn't tell me. They went ex post facto. They went back in time. Then they produce evidence after they've made their decision. And the evidence that they produce is actually, in my view, incorrect. They've looked at proportions of deaths in age group and try to intimate that as risk. In my next response to them, I go to the CDC and I said the CDC indicates risk by case fatality ratio, and I give the case fatality ratios.
Yeah.
So even the evidence that they've quote,
so they
cited,
try to use a population-based model?
No, they actually used proportions of deaths in age group and said, well, you said below a certain age, the risk is negligible. Well, it is according to the case fatality rate. So this is precisely the type of disagreement in interpretation of data that deserves discussion. And Senator Ron Johnson, when this all happened, called Richard Barron, American Board of Internal Medicine, wrote a letter, called him out and said, let's discuss it. Let's discuss it, what the issues are. Barron refuses to do so. He tweets a few days later that he's joining forces with the American Medical Association, so there's no discussion. So Johnson writes the board and says, listen, I asked McCullough to come and testify. He did the best he could, twice. Senator Bob Hall from Texas writes and said, listen, I called McCullough. He testified for Health and Human Services. He helped us. And then
with
the best I could.
The best you could with what evidence in this brand new virus, this brand new issue,
it's an evolving virus, right? So that's all very fair statements. And then innumerable doctors write the board. Now the board says that I have a right to appeal, that in a sense the conviction has occurred. I have the right to appeal. I have to name witnesses, name attorneys, ask for an in-person or a virtual meeting, and this all has to be in a few days.
You have PR firms directly infiltrating medical boards, conflicts of interest like crazy. I was going to say, I found the timing suspicious too, in that you had Ron Johnson running for office saying, I am going to bring investigations on the injuries from vaccines. I'm going to call, Fauci and others. You had Rand Paul saying, I'm all over this. I'm going after gain of function. And I just thought, in the climate, the Democratic Party, which seems to have taken a side on this, I'm not political about it, but there's a politics around it, and there was a concern that should there be this red wave, the power of investigation that would be there, and I have to assume they all know one of the primary voices and specialists that's going to appear is you. You have before, you've been at the hearings for Ron Johnson, you've been here in Texas. Boy, it is sure a lot better if the number one witness they're going to bring and the most educated and highest credentialed person, they can say, yeah, but that guy lost his license. He's uncertified, not licensed, uncertified doctor. They want to demote it to discredit what I think they're concerned you're about to say in what may be some of the most important investigations and hearings in this country.
Well, there may be help on the way from Senator Rand Paul. The bombshell news breaks that we learn that the ABIM is now, it appears to be working with the PR firm that is representing Pfizer and Moderna, and it gets deeper than that.
Wow.
Weber Shandwick. Weber Shandwick is a long-standing, the world's largest PR firm, public relations firm. They have a long-standing business relationship with Pfizer. In 2020, they pick up the marketing contract for Moderna. So Pfizer and Moderna have Weber Shandwick. Weber Shandwick then engages in a relationship with Rochelle Lewinsky and the CDC. They get a $53 million contract from the CDC, and then Weber Shandwick embeds their marketing team for Pfizer Moderna within the CDC in Atlanta. They are in an embedded unit, and these young individuals who work for the marketing firm, they're posting their posts on LinkedIn and others saying, "Hey, I'm embedded in the CDC now, promoting COVID-19 vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna, because the Weber Shandwick now has as their contracts, they have the CDC and they have Pfizer, Moderna." Senator Rand Paul writes a letter October 24th, 2022, and he writes to Rochelle Lewinsky and says, "What is this?" There it is.
Okay.
What is this, Del? That you have an embedded marketing unit for the vaccine companies within the CDC. The CDC should have nothing to do with pharma. They should
certainly nothing to do with the marketing arm of pharma, like the advertiser.
Right.
No, come on in. Not only are we going to refute, like we're going to bring you in to help us.
How can they be a fair broker of
can't.
children who need to receive vaccines when they have embedded marketing units? And now how this ties to the American Board of Internal Medicine, this is a stunning South by Southwest, which is a very notable festival and IT meeting here in Austin, puts up on its schedule for next year a session called When Doctors Prescribe Misinformation. Who are the panelists for this? One is Aaliyah Mohsen from Weber Shandwick, Wasim Khalid from Blackbird AI, which is an AI company, and Richard Barron, the CEO of American Board of Internal Medicine.
Oh my God.
So there they are in public. So now
As are three separate specialists, but really it's the same.
Bring them together.
propaganda
There's
machine.
the connection. So now we can see what's going on.
Yeah.
Anybody who stands in the way of these vaccines and the power of Pfizer, Moderna is going to be steamrolled. And Americans don't have a chance unless it's people like me and Rand Paul and Ron Johnson and you and others who stand up.
Where's your career at now? I know that when this all started, you were at Baylor. They ended up saying, under the circumstances, you had another job. Is this affecting your career?
Yeah, so what happened was I had an administrative and clinical role at a major medical center in Dallas, and that job terminated really before the vaccines in January of 2021, after I had published greatly on COVID, investigational drug applications, testified in the U.S. Senate, did everything I could. I basically was shown the door. About 6 months later, I was then sued by that health system for media and their interpretation that I was dragging them into the media. Well, I still had hospital privileges there. I still saw and examined patients. I transferred my practice to a private practice, which thrived. Thousands of calls for new patient appointments, brought in lots more patients to the medical center, stayed the same medical center, but different employer. Now, on the heels of this announcement, I've just been let go from that job with no substantive reason. And the only thing I can conclude is that with a perfect clinical track record, perfect set of board scores, I've taken the American Board of Internal Medicine 4 times, done great, cardiology 3 times. They rely on my research and the board questions. I've done the best I can. What I'm concluding is I'm on the brink of being probably the first doctor in modern American history to be stripped of my residency and my fellowship and my credentials. 6 years of my life and all of this effort for political reasons around COVID-19, and largely for doing my service as a citizen testifying under oath.
Is there anything, we have an audience of millions watching this, that you have been keeping us updated? Many people out there, I think, are saying to themselves, my life was saved because I listened to Dr. Peter McCullough and I avoided that vaccine, went with different approaches that have also been presented here. Now we want to help you. You obviously are going to have legal costs, things like that. Is there a way that we can get involved? We have a very active community out there. How can we help? Because if you go down, it's the dominoes for everyone else out there. That's what they want, right? They want to scare every other doctor. I don't want to scare every other doctor. I want them to say, I'm following Peter McCullough because Peter McCullough won and survived that. So what can we do to help?
Well, I tell you, I will win and survive, and there's always a silver lining. I have a website, petermcculloughmd.com. You can go there. There is a support button. It goes to a funding mechanism, which is always appreciated. But I want people to know there are good organizations out there. Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, AAPSonline.org. They are suing the ABIM in general for a violation of my civil rights and every other person's civil rights who've been hit with these decertifications. So AAPSonline.org, they take no pharma money. They clearly could benefit from good public support. And then the new venture. And the new venture, I think, is very exciting. I've taken a board position. I'm the chief scientific officer now for the Wellness Company.
Okay.
And the Wellness Company is a national alternative healthcare system. It's virtual. It's through a cell phone app or a computer. It will have some physical presence, but it involves verticals of doctors and patient care, community pharmacies that will always reliably dispense the drugs, in vitro diagnostics, imaging, counseling, nutraceuticals, and supplements. It's about a $5 app on the cell phone. It's affordable. The physician visits are very affordable. It's a cash-based system where the more expensive things can go, like labs and in vitro diagnostics, can go on insurance. But the Wellness Company will provide care where patients now have been denied. You know, there's people who have taken a vaccine and they can't even see their doctor. There still are acute COVID patients that are desperate to get ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine or prednisone. So the Wellness Company, I think, is going to be a great opportunity. Everybody could sign up for that and just have it as a backup. By the way, company after company is signing up, having the Wellness Company be its supplemental benefit. So that way the company...
And you will have your own pharmacy, I take it, or a connection to a pharmacy to make sure?
Yeah, they're going to be a whole listing and grouping of community pharmacies, which have really been the heroes in this.
That's how we got through with my family.
Yeah, and you know, naturopathic doctors have been heroes through this whole process.
Yeah.
We have clinical pharmacists that are going to help. There's going to be a big effort on what's called deprescribing. There's patients who have been loaded up on a whole variety of neurotropic drugs and others. And we've got to start to thin out the pharmacopoeia there. So I'm going to actually move my practice onto the Wellness Company platform. I'll be a bit more virtual. I'll probably have the first physical installation of the Wellness Company in the DFW area. So what's coming out of this, Del, is that I will become stronger and louder. My analyses are pinpoint. The truth will come out.
Yes.
There is no way that individuals who are advancing this vaccine syndicate, this agenda, what we call in our book the Bio-Pharmaceutical complex, there's no way that they can prevail when we hold the truth.
I totally agree. I love that you're so passionate and not just sort of running from this, but you are charging headlong into it, truly heroic and brilliant. And you are such a difference maker. You're what has given hope. I think this movement is growing leaps and bounds. There are so many successes that I point to all the time, but you know, in many ways, you're such a catalyst for great change and I think a brighter future. And I think these sort of virtual medical spaces and things is going to bring a whole new approach towards how medicine can be practiced and how we can be more involved in the decisions we're making with our own health. I just want to really have you just quickly hit us up. I know in Dallas, you and the British heart doctor that has spoken out, Asim Malhotra, who has been on, we've had him on virtually on this show, but you guys are going to be speaking live in Dallas just a couple of weeks.
Well, we are. You know, we've been communicating back and forth, text, email, and actually talking for nearly 2 years now. Prominent, younger, more handsome UK cardiologist, and of course he's smarter with the British accent. You know,
you always sound smarter,
when
right?
someone has a British accent, I think my uncle Ivan told me he's British. I think it's like a fourfold increase in perceived, not real intelligence.
Except
perceived.
being able to list authors of studies and name like the studies. I think you take the lead there.
But Malhotra is really a wonderful case study because, as you've probably reviewed your audience, his father takes the vaccine, a very former prominent physician, almost certainly has a vaccine-related atherosclerotic cardiovascular event, dies. And Malhotra, who is promoting the vaccines on Good Morning Britain, what have you, has to come to the realization that, listen, they have big safety issues. I'm talking to him, coaching him. He says, I have to do my own analysis. I have to write my own papers. And he does it, and he gets them published. And that's very hard to do.
Yeah,
I give him great
amazing
credit. And then he comes out and says, I have to warn people. And so Malhotra's coming, Asim is coming, November 29th. We're going to be in the Dallas Arboretum
Great.
Anybody
there
in
it is,
DFW
folks. If you
area,
want to get tickets, want to get in there, definitely www.vacsafety.org/events. Really brilliant event. You're looking at two of the biggest voices in heart health in the world now standing together discussing COVID and the vaccine. This is change upon us. This is what has to happen. I always say, in many ways, these are the birth pangs. I think this COVID thing, whether it's military driven, whatever it ends up being, to me, it's sort of the white knuckle grasp of the Neanderthals of medicine trying to hold on to their relevance as really this paradigm of medicine is shifting. And, you know, I feel like people like you are that transitional space. You're leading us into, I think, a better world. I really see this as positive in the end, but change is difficult and it's painful. It is so refreshing to see someone that's in as much turmoil, shall we say, as you are, and still smiling, beautiful, and speaking all over the place. It's just truly an honor to know you.
Thank you so much.
And have you here. Our blessings are with you, and we're going to support you in every way we can.
Thank you.
All right, take care. All right. Well, look, for those of you that were just, you know, watching and sitting through that, that's a lot of science. It's a lot of detail. It's what we do here. But I know you love it because you're watching, but maybe you have a friend or a relative that just can't handle that much information. Can you just give me the clip notes? That's exactly what we've done with Get Vaccinated. Folks, it's time for you to get vaccinated. The HighWire is launching a brand new campaign to arm you with the facts in short videos you can share anywhere, featuring the world's leading experts on COVID-19, vaccines, and everything in between.
Natural immunity appears to be robust, complete, and durable.
These are the drop the mic, fully cited facts to help you, the super spreaders of truth, in this real war of misinformation. Share the link, download the short video, and post to your favorite social media platform. All you have to do is go to thehighwire.com/getvaccinated for all of the latest short videos. And make sure to grab your Get Vaccinated merch at thehighwire.com. Click shop for the latest in HighWire gear. We want you armed with the facts online and on the front lines. Get the facts, lose the fear at thehighwire.com. Well, as it turns out, Dr. Peter McCullough was the very first Get Vaccinated video we ever did. Now you can see why. I mean, the amount of science that you just got in that last hour is absolutely incredible. To think that someone that can recite science at that level, that is published where he is at, and they think that they can take away his certifications, a man who outclasses everybody that is trying to take him down. These are the times we live in. And, you know, I want, when we talk about these things, for us to not be debilitated by the, you know, the Goliath that we're up against here. But look at where Dr. McCullough is at and what he is representing. He is smiling, he is glowing, he is charging forward. A man who really, from our perspective, only has everything to lose. He is the, you know, probably one of the greatest heart doctors of all times. That stuff could all be stripped away from him, and it still doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because the truth is what is driving him. Saving lives is what is driving him. And I want you to think to yourself, what is it you're doing? You know, are you having the conversations you should be having? Are you letting your friends take their kids in to get this vaccine because they're uneducated and say, oh, I don't really want to bother them here? And I want you to imagine that if you saw a child being abused or hurt in any way, if you looked in and just said, I'm going to leave that alone and just shut the door. Is that who we are? Because I know in this movement we're doing a lot of judgment of who is evil and what is evil, but that evil is really just a slippery slope of us losing our humanity. And so I really want us to check in right now as we're going into this Thanksgiving week. What are we going to do about our own humanity? And what are we going to be responsible for when we live in the future that will be upon us? When we look at our children and we look them in the eyes and we say, I did what I could do. I put all of my effort in, just like Dr. Peter McCullough did and others like him. I did my part. And for some of you, doing your part is certainly helping us here at ICANN, the HighWire, just by helping us fund you know, all the work that we're doing. It is a huge step in making a difference. What I do to make a difference is to do this show. I also go out and speak all over this country, and though it's going to Thanksgiving week and my family is going to be driving back towards Boulder, Colorado, I'm going to be flying out to give some really great talks and be joined by some great people, and I'm flying into the belly of the beast there in California, just outside of Los Angeles. Tomorrow night, on Friday, Liberty and the Divine, an evening with Del Bigtree, Amy Bond, and the amazing Pastor Rob McCoy. That is going to be a night to remember. You definitely want to check that out and get out there. It's sponsored by Perk, so we are at Rob McCoy's church there. It's going to be fantastic. And then that's tomorrow night. Then Sunday, early evening at 5 p.m. back in my hometown of Boulder, Colorado, where Polis just said he's going to state it's an emergency with flu and RSV. I'm taking my talk. I'm calling it the pandemic of lies. For all of you out there that have friends that you think are on the verge of waking up, that are starting to ask questions, these speaking events I'm doing right now, I'm laying out, it's basically, you know, encapsulating all that we've delivered here on the HighWire. That's going to be at my family's church, the Unity of Boulder Church in Boulder, Colorado, 5 p.m. Sunday. So I'll see you in California. I'll see you in Colorado. We're going to do everything we can. And please, as we go into this Thanksgiving week, I want you to just start, you know, taking some deep breaths and imagining the conversations you're going to have with your families as they sit across the table. How you're going to be courteous and you're going to be clear, you're going to be open-minded, and you're going to listen, but you are going to start presenting information to your family to wake them up. We need them. We need you to need them, okay? We cannot let our families go astray here. We are under attack. Everything we know about freedom is hanging in the balance. I don't care what party anyone is in. In fact, both sides of the aisle have gotten behind authoritarianism and locked us down in states that were Republican and Democrat. It didn't seem to matter except for a very few. So I really only focus on those that are making the change because change is right, not based on some political affiliation. But we've got to have these conversations. You cannot allow yourself to be politically correct any longer or censor yourself. You know, it is time to have these conversations or we are going to be in real trouble. It is upon us now. We are working here at the HighWire, but we can only do as much as you share with the people that you know. Introduce them to the HighWire. Introduce them to the interview that you just saw of Dr. Peter McCullough and say, do you not trust this guy? Does he not seem like he knows what he's talking about? We can and are making a difference in this world. Every time you are bold enough to open up and stand for truth, you have shifted the pulse of the world. It's that important. And believe me, I'm going back and I'm going to deal with some family and friends there in the heart of the beast in Colorado. I'm bringing my A game. And I'm going to be at that family table. And boy, you're going to wish you could be there because I got some things to say. I know you do too. Don't be afraid to say it. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Enjoy your families. Enjoy the debate. Enjoy life. That is what we're fighting for here on the HighWire and YouTube. I'll see you next week.